She wasn't supposed to be there that night. The reservation had been made for 2. The table at the restaurant on West 48th Street, the anticipation she'd spent 3 days building, the version of herself she'd carefully ironed into a green dress. All of it was supposed to mean something. But the message came at 6:47 on a Thursday evening in March, short enough to be insulting and long enough to confirm that she had, once again, made room for someone who had not made room for her. By 7:15, Serafina James was sitting alone in the lobby of a midtown Manhattan hotel with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't ordered and no particular reason to go home. He wasn't supposed to be there either. He had a flight to catch, a life that moved in straight lines. Boardrooms and acquisition contracts and the particular kind of silence that only men who have watched everything fall apart know how to carry. He had no interest in hotel lobbies, or in strangers, or in conversations that didn't have a clear outcome. He had a schedule and a purpose, and 16 years of relentless forward motion that did not include sitting in a velvet chair next to a woman in a green dress who was pretending not to be having a bad night. And then the rain started. What happened between Serafina and the Korean stranger who sat down across from her that night? Nobody planned it. Nobody asked for it. Nobody would have predicted it. And when the sun came up the next morning, both of them moved back into their separate lives, convinced they were walking away from something that would remain safely contained in a single Thursday evening. They were wrong. Because the following Monday morning, J-Rim. O walked through the front doors of the firm where Serafina had given 7 years of her life. And he walked in like he owned the place. Because he did. And now they have a secret that lives in the space between a professional handshake and an outright lie, and a company that one of them is determined to save and the other is terrified to lose, and something that started in a hotel lobby that neither of them knows how to name or how to forget. This is not a story about a one-night stand. This is a story about 2 people who needed one honest night so desperately that they didn't stop to ask what would come after it. About what happens when the stranger who saw you clearly turns out to be the person with the most power over your daily life. About grief that passes from parent to child without anyone meaning for it to. About the particular kind of courage it takes to stop pretending you are fine when you are, in fact, not fine at all. Welcome to The Night We Didn't Plan. If this story already has you feeling something, you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from us. And drop a comment below right now. Are you Team Serafina, Team J-Rim, or Team They Need to Figure It Out Together and Stop Being So Stubborn? I read every single comment. Everyone, let's talk. The lobby of the Kimberly Hotel on West 55th Street smelled like cedar and expensive candles. And at 7:23 on a Thursday evening in March, it was the last place Serafina James expected to be spending her night. She was 29 years old. She had a good job, a clean apartment, a set of routines she was quietly proud of. Morning runs before the city woke up, meal prep on Sundays, a reading habit she had kept alive since college. She was by any reasonable external measure, a woman who had things together. What she did not have, apparently, was any reliable luck when it came to men. The message from Marcus had been 7 words. Something came up. Really sorry. Maybe next week? She had stared at it for a full minute before putting her phone face down on the restaurant table, signaling for the check on the sparkling water she hadn't touched, and walking out. She had told herself she wasn't upset. She was fine. She was completely and absolutely fine. And the tightness in her throat was the cold air coming off the street, and had nothing to do with sitting alone at a table she'd confirmed twice by text that morning. She ended up in the hotel lobby because it started raining before she reached the subway entrance, and she'd left her umbrella at the office. Again. And the Kimberly was the nearest door she could push open without being a customer. She found a low velvet chair near the window and sat in it, and watched the rain streak down the glass, and told herself she would leave as soon as it let up. That was at 7:23. By 7:40, the rain had made no promises. The lobby had filled and thinned and filled again with people in wet coats managing phones and children, and the particular urban urgency of a city that doesn't slow down for weather. Serafina had stopped pretending to check her messages, and was simply watching the room, which was something she was good at, professionally and otherwise. The ability to sit quietly in a space and understand its patterns without needing to be part of them. And then a man in a dark overcoat walked in from the street, looking like he had personally offended the weather. He stood just inside the entrance for a moment, water dripping from his coat onto the marble, scanning the lobby with the kind of focus that came from being accustomed to walking into rooms and immediately assessing them. He was carrying a single carry-on bag. His phone was already in his hand when he stepped in from the cold, and whatever he saw on the screen made him go still. Not the stillness of someone who has stopped moving, the stillness of someone absorbing a blow. His jaw tightened by a fraction. His shoulders pulled back, not in aggression, but in the specific posture of a person taking on weight they had not anticipated. He stood like that long enough that the woman at the front desk glanced over and then looked away. He didn't notice her. He was somewhere inside the news his phone was delivering, working through it in real time. And then he made a decision, visible in the small straightening of his spine, put the phone in his pocket, and looked up. The only available seat in the lobby was the chair across from Serafina. He looked at the chair. He looked at her. She held his gaze with the New York expression that said she was not inviting conversation but was not going to be rude about it either. He nodded, a courtesy, and sat down. He did not try to talk to her. He looked out at the rain the same way she'd been looking at it, with the focused patience of someone who has learned that some things cannot be rushed. For several minutes, the two of them coexisted in the quiet of a shared space, and there was something unexpectedly companionable about it. Two strangers with nowhere urgent to be, watching the same rain. It was Serafina who broke it. She was never entirely sure why. Later, she would think it was because he was the first person all evening who had not expected anything from her. Your flight got canceled. He turned to look at her, not startled. Reassessing, in the way of someone encountering something unexpected in a place they'd already mapped. How did you know? You came in like you were supposed to keep moving and then stopped. You have a bag, but you didn't go to the desk. If you had a reservation, you'd have gone there first. A pause. Also, JFK has been issuing delay alerts since around 5. The storm came in fast from the coast. He studied her for a moment with an attention that did not feel invasive, just genuine. Seoul, he said. The 7:55. First available tomorrow morning? 11:40. He glanced at the window. 16 hours. Welcome to New York in March. She said it without irony, and the corner of his mouth moved toward something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the neighborhood of one. His name was J. Rim. He offered only that, and she offered only hers, and there was an unspoken agreement in the economy of first names only, that this lobby, this rain, this accidental hour was its own enclosed world, and did not need to connect to any other. They talked for 2 hours and 10 minutes. She would remember the duration with a precision that surprised her later. Not about work. Neither of them brought it up, and she understood afterward that this was the precise thing that made everything else possible. He didn't know she managed the 4th floor of a consulting firm 8 blocks away. She didn't know he was in New York on business at all. They were simply two people in a lobby with time to fill. And the conversation moved from the rain to the city to the particular experience of being an outsider in a place that believes itself to be the center of everything. And somewhere in that conversation, something loosened in her chest that had been tight since 6:47. He listened the way very few people had ever listened to her. Not waiting for a pause to insert his own experience, not half present while monitoring his phone. He listened with his whole attention, and when he spoke it was because he had something to say. And when she spoke, he gave her sentences the respect of actually hearing them before responding. It should not have been remarkable. It was remarkable. She noticed things about him in the incremental way you notice things when you're not trying to. The way he held his coffee cup. The way he thought before he spoke. A deliberateness that wasn't slowness. It was the opposite of slowness. It was the precision of someone who had learned that the right word used once was worth more than 5 approximate ones. The way he talked about soul, without nostalgia and without distance. Just a clear-eyed affection for a place that had made him. The way his eyes, when he was listening, were completely still. He noticed things about her, too. She could feel it. The particular quality of attention that doesn't categorize, that takes in details without deciding what they mean, and holds them without needing to use them. She had spent 7 years in an office full of people who noticed things about her only insofar as she was useful. This was different from that in a way that was difficult to name and impossible to pretend she didn't feel. She had not thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who had no stake in who you were supposed to be. She thought about it that night. Growing up, Serafina had been the responsible one. Not by temperament initially, but by circumstance, and then slowly by identity. Her mother had worked 2 jobs through her middle school years. Her father had been the one with the salary and the plan and the confidence. And then the plan had been taken from him, and the confidence had followed. And Serafina had been 14 years old when she learned that the people you depend on are not always able to hold the weight you've put on them. She had not blamed her father. She had simply started carrying more. It was not a decision she remembered making. It was something she had noticed, looking back, the year she started cooking dinner, the year she stopped asking for things, the year she began performing capable so consistently that she forgot there was a version of herself that didn't know how to. By the time she was 29, capable was not a performance anymore. It was her. But there were moments, late evenings alone, mornings before the day started demanding things, when she was aware of a tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep. The tiredness of being the person who holds things together. The specific exhaustion of someone who has never been allowed, or never allowed herself, to simply not know what she was doing for a while. Jai Rim had not asked her to hold anything. That was the thing. He had simply talked to her and listened, and let the conversation go where it went, without steering it toward any particular destination. And she had found herself saying things she hadn't said to anyone. Not dramatic things, ordinary things, the small observations and half-formed opinions that accumulate inside a person when they spend their days being useful to other people and their evenings going home to an apartment where there is no one to say them to. She had said them, and he had received them without judgment or advice, and something in her that had been braced for a long time had simply, quietly, let go. She had not planned to let go of anything. She had planned to wait out the rain and go home. The body, she thought, knows things before the mind consents to know them. She had been stood up. She was in a stranger's hotel lobby in shoes that had gotten wet. She had every practical reason to go home, draw a bath, write off the evening. She stayed. Serafina was 29 years old. She had spent all of those years being careful about her choices, her reputation, the careful accumulation of a life that could not be destabilized by a single impulsive night. She had watched her father lose everything to forces outside his control, and she had decided very young that she would give those forces nothing to work with. She would be steady and prepared, and she would not do impulsive things. She had given herself 7 years of carefully not doing impulsive things. The rain did not stop that night. She left before 6, not because she was ashamed, or not only because of that. It was more that in the gray quiet of early morning, listening to a city that hadn't started yet, she became suddenly and completely aware of how far outside the edges of her ordinary life she had traveled in the past 10 hours. And she knew, with the precise clarity that only comes at 5:45 in the morning, that the way back to those edges required leaving before the day made this real. She wrote nothing, left nothing behind. At the door she paused for a moment with her hand on the frame and allowed herself one look back. At the stillness. At the city going pale outside the window. At the shape of a night that had asked nothing of her and taken nothing she hadn't chosen to give. And then she left. She was Serafina James from the 4th floor again before she reached the street. She went home. She showered. She went to work. The email went out at 9:47 that Monday morning. It came from the executive assistant of the outgoing CEO, forwarded to all staff, and the subject line read, "Important company announcement. All hands meeting, 10 South a.m., main conference room." Serafina read it at her desk and felt the particular low-level dread that company-wide all-hands meetings reliably produced. The firm had been in transition for 3 months. The founding partner had retired. A restructuring consultancy had come through and left behind a document full of recommendations nobody was implementing. And the staff had been living in the low-grade anxiety of people who know a change is coming but do not know its shape. She printed the meeting materials, delivered them to the conference room at 9:52, arranged the chairs at 9:56, and took her usual position near the door at 9:59. This was her job, the architecture of it, anticipating the room before it filled. Being the person who made the invisible logistics visible by ensuring they never had to be noticed at all. 7 years of that. 7 years of the kind of competence that gets taken for granted because it never fails. The new owner walked in at 10:02. She was looking down at her notepad. She always had a notepad. It was part of the architecture, when the shift happened. The change in the room's energy. A specific quality of attention that a crowd produces when it is collectively assessing someone's authority. She looked up with the automatic professional reflex of someone who monitors rooms for a living. The world did not stop. Her heart did not lurch dramatically. What happened was something quieter and more complete than either of those things. Her body recognized him before her mind finished the sentence, and the recognition went through her like cold water poured from a height. And she stood at her position near the door with her notepad and her pen and her 7 years of professional composure, and she did not move. He saw her at the same instant. She knew because she was already watching, and she caught the tell. A pause so small it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for it. Half a stride. Contained immediately. Recovered so cleanly that by the time he reached the head of the table, he was already extending his hand to the outgoing senior director and saying something she couldn't hear from across the room. His expression did not change. His voice, when it reached her, was measured and clear. He did not look at her again for the entire 40-minute meeting. She was grateful and unreasonably wounded by this in equal measure, which was information about herself she did not particularly want. His name, the senior director announced, was J. Rim O., founder and CEO of JRO Capital, headquartered in Seoul, 34 years old. He had acquired the firm with the intention to restructure and stabilize it, not to close it, not to sell its assets, but to rebuild what wasn't working while preserving what was. He looked forward to meeting with each department individually in the coming weeks. Serafina wrote down exactly none of that. She stood near the door for 40 minutes and breathed evenly and deliberately, and when the meeting ended, she was the first person out of the room. She went to the bathroom on the 4th floor, not the nearest one, the one at the end of the hallway that nobody really used, and she stood at the sink with cold water running over her wrists and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. 34. He was 34. He had said he worked in acquisitions, that night, without details. She had not asked. She had not told him she was a secretary. They had both existed, for those hours, without the weight of what they did for a living, and she had thought that was a gift. It was a gift. It had just come with a cost she hadn't seen. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She went back to her desk and responded to 6 emails and organized the afternoon correspondence and did not think about J. Rim. Oh, in the way that means you are doing nothing but thinking about him. She did not speak to him that day, or the next, or the one after that. He had taken the executive suite on the 6th floor, and he had a rhythm she became involuntarily aware of. Early arrivals, late departures, lunch brought in, afternoon departmental meetings that ran precisely to their scheduled end. She knew his schedule the way she knew everything about the building's operations, because it was her job to know. And she told herself that was the only reason. The 5th day was not the first time he had come close to her desk. It was the first time he had stopped. She had been aware of him each time he passed. She had clocked the rhythm of his footsteps by the 3rd day, which was something she found deeply inconvenient and refused to examine directly. She had also been observing the way the building responded to him, not in a fawning way. He wasn't that kind of authority. It was subtler. People finished their sentences faster in the hallway when he was passing through. Meetings started on time. He did not create fear. He created attention. There was a difference, and she was the kind of person who noticed it. What she noticed about him privately was something else. He was alone in a particular way. Not unhappily. It wasn't loneliness she was observing. It was more like a man who had learned to operate entirely within his own capacity and had arrived at a place where this was both his greatest strength and the whole shape of his life. He ate alone. He moved through the building without the small social friction of someone who stopped to chat or was stopped. He was not unfriendly. She had watched him be genuinely warm with the junior staff on 2 occasions, an unperformed warmth that landed differently than the calibrated kind. But he moved through his days like someone who had decided, somewhere, that efficiency required containment. She recognized it because she had done something similar. Hers had been built out of necessity. She didn't know yet what his had been built out of, but the shape was familiar. On the 5th day, he stopped at her desk. She had felt him coming, and this was the part she hated most. This involuntary recalibration of her nervous system that had apparently occurred without her consent, somewhere between the lobby and the all-hands meeting. She had her eyes on her monitor when he stopped in front of her desk, and she did not look up immediately, giving herself 2 extra seconds. She looked up. He was standing with his hands at his sides, jacket on, no papers. He had memorized whatever he needed before coming down. He looked exactly like someone doing their job. Ms. James. Mr. Oh. Her voice was completely level. She had practiced level in the bathroom mirror that morning. Level was the only register she had available. I need a department briefing. All heads, tenure, portfolio, direct reports, current active client relationships. By Friday. I'll have it to you by Thursday. A pause. Not a long one. In the pause, something existed that neither of them named. Thursday is fine. He walked back toward the elevator. She watched him go without appearing to watch him go, which required a specific kind of attention she was embarrassed to have developed. She exhaled. She opened a new document. She began to build the briefing he needed, because that was her job, and she was very good at her job. And whatever else was true about the situation, she was not going to let it make her less good at the thing she had spent 7 years building. The restructuring moved through the building the way bad weather moves through a city. You felt the pressure dropping before the clouds arrived, and when it came, it didn't announce itself. It simply changed what was possible to breathe. Serafina had been at the firm for 7 years. She had started as a junior administrative coordinator at 22. Fresh from a state school in Georgia, with a business degree, and a scholarship she'd earned through the specific stubbornness of someone who cannot afford to fail. She had worked her way up through the same mechanism, arriving before she was expected, staying past when she was needed, being the person who knew where things were, and never made it someone else's problem that she knew them. 7 years of institutional memory that lived in no database and on no org chart, only in her. She knew the filing system going back 11 years. She knew which clients needed to be handled by the senior partners, and which could be managed 2 levels down. She knew the preferred communication style of every department head, which of them would say everything was fine right up until it wasn't, and which could be trusted to escalate before a problem became a crisis. She knew the building's rhythms. The coffee cart on the corner that ran out of oat milk by 9:15, the elevator that ran slow on Tuesdays, the conference room on the 3rd floor where the air conditioning was unreliable, and which clients therefore could not be seated in. She was, in every practical sense, irreplaceable. She had never said that out loud, but she had known it the way competent people quietly know their own value, and there was a kind of faith in that. A belief that 7 years of being indispensable meant something when the weather changed. Which made what she found on a Tuesday afternoon in the 4th week of J. Rim's tenure all the more stunning. She found it the way she found most things in that building. Not because anyone told her, but because she paid attention, and she understood how information moved when people thought it was being kept quiet. A document had circulated between the 3 senior directors who predated the acquisition. It was labeled Internal Restructuring Proposal, Phase 1. And it contained a list of 31 positions recommended for elimination in the first 90 days. Her department was first on the list. Her position was second. She read it once. She closed the file. She went back to work for the remaining 2 hours of the day with the kind of calm that is actually the absence of something, the place where feeling used to be before it got too large to hold in a fluorescent-lit Tuesday afternoon. She spent that evening doing the math. 7 years of service. No severance framework announced. 4 months of savings, possibly 5. A father in Atlanta who was stable but not expansively so, who she called every Sunday, and who she could not add to her list of things to manage. A resume she had not updated since the week she joined the firm because she had, in the slow accumulation of 7 years, allowed herself to become someone who assumed she would have time to prepare for the next thing before the current thing ended. She had been careless. She was not going to be careless again. The 2 days she spent sitting with the knowledge that her name was off the revised list were among the stranger days she'd had in a long time. Not because she was ungrateful. She was grateful, in the pragmatic way of someone who had looked squarely at what the alternative would have cost. But gratitude that you don't understand is an uncomfortable thing to carry. It asks you to receive something without knowing what you're receiving it for. And Serafina did not like receiving things she hadn't earned by terms she could identify. She turned it over on the subway home Wednesday evening. She turned it over while she was making dinner, and while she was on the phone with her father. She had called on a Thursday instead of Sunday because she needed to hear his voice, though she did not tell him why. She did not tell him about the list or about the revision. She talked about a client meeting that had gone well and asked about his neighbor's garden, and listened to him describe the progress of the tomatoes with an attention she was grateful he couldn't see on her face. She thought about what it meant that J. Rim had known since the second week and said nothing. She had expected, somewhere underneath everything, that discovery would produce power. That was how she had understood the risk of the situation from the beginning. That a man who knew something about her that she hadn't chosen to share was a man who had something to use. She had been braced for that every morning when she walked into the building, every time he passed her desk, every professional interaction conducted at careful distance. He had not used it. He had sat on it for 3 weeks and done nothing with it except give her the space to decide who she was in the building, without his knowledge complicating that decision. She did not know what to do with that. She went to his office on Friday evening because she needed to understand it before she could accept it. And Serafina James had never in her life accepted something she didn't understand. She took the stairs to the 6th floor. She needed the walk. And because some conversations deserve the approach, they deserve the moment between deciding and arriving, the time to settle into what you are about to ask and why it matters. 3 days after Serafina walked into his office, J. Rim called a meeting with the 3 senior directors who had authored the restructuring proposal. She did not know what was said in that room. The glass was soundproofed, and Daniel was loyal in the way only someone who has worked closely with a person for years can be loyal. He understood which information was his to share and which was not. What she observed, from the position of someone who understood the building's geometry, was that the meeting lasted 93 minutes by her count, that all 3 directors exited with the particular quality of men who had been told something they had not anticipated, and that later that afternoon, a new document circulated among the senior staff. Her department was no longer first on the list. Her position was not on the list at all. She sat with that for 2 days, not because she was ungrateful. She was Mao in the pragmatic way of someone who had looked squarely at what the alternative would have cost. But gratitude you don't understand is an uncomfortable thing to carry. It asks you to receive something without knowing what you're receiving it for. And Serafina James had never in her life been comfortable accepting things she couldn't account for. She thought about it on the subway home Thursday evening. She thought about it over dinner she made on autopilot, standing at the stove with the radio on, and her mind entirely elsewhere. She was trying to locate the logic of it, to find the seam where professional decision and personal consideration began, to determine with any confidence which one had done the work. Because there were 2 possible versions of what had happened. In one of them, J. Rimo had reviewed the restructuring proposal and made the correct business call, and the fact that her name was on it was irrelevant to the outcome. In the other version, he had looked at her name and made a different kind of decision, and the business justification was real, but not the whole truth. She needed to know which version she was living in. She could not be the person who was protected by a secret. She could not build 7 more years on a foundation that had a crack in it she'd chosen not to examine. That was not who she was, and she had not come this far, through everything her family had lost, through every year of keeping the 4th floor standing, to become someone who preferred comfortable uncertainty over difficult clarity. She went back on a Friday evening. The building was emptying. She took the stairs to the 6th floor because she needed the walk, and because some conversations deserve the approach. She knocked on the open door of his office, and he looked up, and neither of them said anything for a moment. She stepped inside and closed the door and did not sit down, because sitting down would have made this easier, and she was not in the habit of making hard conversations easier than they needed to be. Why? He set down his pen. He leaned back in his chair with the measured stillness of someone who has been expecting a question and has not yet decided how much of the answer to give. Your argument was sound. The institutional knowledge issue is real, and I should have identified it in my own due diligence before the proposal reached that stage. The revision was the correct business decision. That's not the whole answer. Quiet. The quality of quiet that means something is about to change. No, it's not. She waited. 7 years of patience. I knew you worked here by the 2nd day. Even. Factual. The way he was factual about things he had decided to be honest about. Not that Thursday. I didn't know that Thursday. But by the Wednesday of my first week, I had my team run background on all senior administrative staff. Standard protocol for a new acquisition. Your file came up, and I recognized your name before I recognized anything else in it. The air in the room shifted the way it had in the lobby the night the rain started. You knew for almost a month. Yes. And said nothing. No. She needed a moment. She took it. Outside his window, the city was doing what it always did. Why not? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might leave it unanswered. Then, because you had clearly decided that the way to handle the situation was to pretend it hadn't happened, and I was not going to walk into your professional life and take that decision from you. Something moved through her. She held it. And taking my name off the list was not related to the hotel. His eyes met hers directly and stayed. Your argument was legitimate. The proposal was built by directors protecting their own budgets by eliminating support staff. It was short-sighted restructuring, and I should have caught it in the initial review. Removing your position was a mistake on the merits, regardless of anything personal. You can say it. The hotel. You can say what it was. A silence of a different quality. That Thursday was the first time in 4 years that I did something I hadn't planned. I'm not certain what to call it. I'm not certain I have the vocabulary for it. She looked at him across his desk, and everything between them, and felt the thing she had been suppressing stop cooperating. My father worked for a company like this one. She had not planned to say it. It came up the way true things do when they've been held too long. Not this firm, this size, this structure. He was there 11 years. The company restructured. He was 44 when his department disappeared in a Friday afternoon email, and he spent the next decade not quite finding his footing again. She stopped. That's not why I came here to work. I came because I believed in the work. But it is why I cannot be casual about what happens to the people on that list. He was watching her with complete attention. I understand that more than you know. And then something she had not seen from him in this building. A loosening. My father built a company when I was a child. When I was 11, the economy turned. He lost everything in 18 months. Not just the business. He lost the version of himself that believed he could make something last. He said it the way people say things they've said to themselves enough times that the words have worn smooth. I buy companies in trouble because I understand what failure costs. Not the balance sheet cost, the other one. The room was very still. She understood, in that stillness, that they were the same kind of person in the way that mattered most. Two people who had watched a parent lose something fundamental and organized their entire adult lives around making sure it never happened again, to themselves or to anyone they could reach. They had found each other in a rainstorm, and here they were. J. Rim. The first time she'd said his name in this building. It landed in the air carrying the full weight of a Thursday in March. I know. He held her gaze. Nothing else needed saying. The restructuring took another 8 weeks. Serafina was moved closer to its center. Not because anything was announced, But because in the departmental review meetings, J. Rim began requesting her presence alongside the department heads. And the department heads, after the first meeting, stopped looking surprised about it. She said clear, specific things about institutional risk, about client relationships that existed differently on paper than in practice, about processes that held because one person understood them and would not survive that person's departure. She said these things across conference tables from directors who had never once looked at her desk for anything other than their morning meeting reminders, and she watched them recalibrate, slowly, in the specific way of people who are discovering they had categorized something incorrectly. And it felt like something overdue that was finally arriving. It was J. Rim who made it possible. She did not pretend otherwise. Between them, in those weeks, things moved the way they move when both people are being careful. Slowly, with a quality of attention to what the other person needed that was its own kind of intimacy. No declarations. No moments designed for acknowledgement. What there was, a budget review that ran 40 minutes over its scheduled time because they had reached a genuine disagreement about the mid-tier client portfolio, and neither of them could stop being right long enough to let it end. A morning she brought him a correction to his quarterly presentation. A date error. A full year off. The kind of small thing that compounds into embarrassment in a room full of people looking for reasons to doubt a new owner. And the look he gave her was not the executive look. The Friday evening, she stayed late to finish an urgent brief and found him still in his office in his shirt sleeves with a takeout container going cold on the credenza. And she knocked and said she was going to the coffee cart on the corner. And he said he'd come. And they walked through the quiet building and stood in the cooling evening air with their cups and said very little. And it was the most honest hour they'd shared since the lobby. The restructuring cost 18 jobs. That number lived in her like a stone. She had fought in every meeting where it was possible to fight, argued for extended transition periods and robust reference letters, and the specific acknowledgement that being made redundant is not the same as being inadequate. She had not won every argument, but she had made them all. And J. Ream had heard every one, which was not nothing. She had worked for people who heard nothing that didn't serve them directly. He heard things he disagreed with and said so clearly, and explained why, and she heard his explanations and gave them the respect of taking them seriously. And sometimes she changed her position, and sometimes she didn't. And it was the most honest professional relationship she had ever had. It was a Thursday, a different Thursday, 8 weeks into the restructuring, when she found the founding documents in the misfiled archive folder. She knew the founding partner's name. She did not know the co-founders. Thomas James. She read it twice. She sat in the archive room on the second floor with the fluorescent light humming and read the name a third time. Her father's name was Thomas James. He was 60 years old, and he lived in Atlanta, and he had worked for a company for 11 years before a restructuring email ended his career, and he had never, in all the years since, mentioned the company he had helped to found. She had applied here because a professor had mentioned the firm, because the role suited her experience, because she needed somewhere to start. She had spent 7 years as the institutional memory of a company her father had helped build without ever knowing it. She closed the folder. She sat for a while. Then she took the elevator to the 6th floor. J. Rim looked up when she came in and took one look at her face and set everything else aside without a word. She told him, all of it. The misfiled folder, the incorporation document, her father's name in the footnote of a company she'd been carrying for 7 years, without knowing why it felt like it mattered so much. When she finished, the room held the particular quiet of something real having just been said. You didn't know. Not a question. I didn't know. He never told me. I don't think he could talk about this place. The firm went through an earlier restructuring, years before I joined. That was when he lost his position. He never really came back from it. J. Rim leaned forward with his elbows on the desk and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the executive expression, not the lobby expression. Something older, something that understood. You came back to something he built and kept it alive. 7 years. Without knowing that was what you were doing. She had not cried at work in 7 years. She was not going to start. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and looked at the wall past his shoulder and breathed through her nose until she was sure she had it. I want to call him tonight. I want to tell him it's still standing. Then call him. She nodded. She looked at J. Rim across the desk and felt the thing between them that had been in an uncertain state for weeks settle. Not resolve. It was more complicated than resolution. But settle. The way something finds its correct weight when it stops fighting gravity. I don't know how to do this, she said. Not about the call. About them. Neither do I. He said it without apology, which was the only honest way to say it. I have been making decisions about businesses since I was 26. I am not an impulsive person. I don't do hotel lobbies and I don't do whatever this is. I have spent the last 2 months unable to pretend it isn't there, and I have very few frameworks for any of this. And I am telling you that because you deserve to know it before you decide what to do with it. She was quiet for a moment. The night you found out I worked here, that Wednesday, what did you actually think? He considered it with the care he brought to things that deserved it. I thought I'd been given something complicated. A pause. And then I thought, I am not going to ruin this by being stupid. Whatever it is, I am not going to use it as leverage or dismiss it because it's inconvenient. I was going to let you decide what it was, and handle my side of it with enough integrity that you'd have room to make that decision without pressure from me. She looked at him. She thought about Marcus and his 7-word text and the green dress and the rain and the lobby and everything that had come after. And she thought about her father's name in a footnote and 7 years she'd spent without knowing. And she thought about 18 empty desks and 8 weeks of conference room arguments for people she would never stop feeling responsible for. And she thought, this is what it looks like when someone is actually trying. We have to be careful. She turned toward the window for a moment, then back. I still work for you. The structure doesn't change. I know that. And if this becomes something that affects how people see my work, how I see my own work, we deal with it directly. No pretending, no managing it from a distance. Agreed. I have no interest in anything that requires either of us to be less than honest. His eyes were steady. I've built a career on not pretending things are fine when they're not. I'm not going to apply a different standard here. J. Rim, yes. I'm going to go call my father. The almost smile, the real one, all the way this time. Tell him the building is in good hands. She stood. She smoothed her jacket. At the door, she stopped and looked back. And he was watching her with that complete attention. And she thought, I have been seen. Not the careful version I present. The actual one. The woman who walked into a lobby in wet shoes because she didn't want to be disappointed alone and found something she hadn't known she was missing. I'll have the revised client brief on your desk by 9 tomorrow. Good night, Miss Don James. Good night, Mr. O. It was a Tuesday in October when Serafina James boarded a plane for the first time in 3 years. She was 30 years old. The title on her badge had changed, Director of Operations, a thing J. Rim had proposed in September with the straightforward logic he brought to everything. The role existed in practice. Failing to name it was inefficient. She had told him that if he ever used the word efficient to describe her career advancement again, she would reorganize his entire filing system. He had said she was welcome to try. She had not tried, because his filing system was, infuriatingly, already excellent. The company was not saved in the way the word usually implies, clean and triumphant, with a clear before and after. It was saved the way real things get saved, messily, incrementally, with losses that still stung, and gains that felt earned precisely because they weren't given. 6 of the 18 people let go in the restructuring had since been rehired as the firm's client base grew. 3 others had landed well elsewhere, and Serafina had written their reference letters herself and meant every word. The remaining 9 she thought about more than she told anyone. She suspected she always would. Her father had come up from Atlanta in August. She'd met him at JFK and taken him by cab to Midtown, and walked him through the lobby of a building that had his name in its foundation documents. He had been quiet through most of it. The particular quiet he kept around this chapter of his life. But when she showed him the framed incorporation document, he had placed his hand flat against the glass and stayed like that for a long time. And then he had looked at his daughter, And whatever was in his face in that moment belonged only to the two of them, and that room, and the strange road that had brought her here without either of them planning it. He met J-Rim briefly, in a hallway introduction that lasted 4 minutes and contained a conversation Serafina mostly stayed out of. Afterward, her father said, carefully, that the man seemed like someone who understood what it cost to keep a thing standing. Serafina said yes. Her father looked at her the way fathers do when they are choosing not to say the rest of what they're thinking, and she loved him for the choice. She and J-Rim had been careful. The word meant something real. Not the carefulness of people trying to hide something, but the carefulness of people who know that what they have can be damaged if they're not deliberate about protecting it. The company came first. The decisions they made about what was appropriate were made together, without either of them being required to set aside who they were. There were days it was complicated. There were days it was the most straightforward thing in her life. There were many days that were both soul. That was why the plane. He had been back in the Korean office for 3 weeks managing the parent company, and she was joining for 10 days that were officially a site visit. There were legitimate operational reasons for her to be there, and they had both made sure of that, and unofficially the first time she would be in his city. In the country where he had grown up and watched his father's world come apart and decided to spend the next 2 decades making sure it didn't happen to anyone else he could reach. The seat next to her on the plane was empty. She had the aisle and the window and the in-between, and she put her bag in the overhead and her water bottle in the seat pocket and her book in her lap, and she looked out the window at the tarmac where a ground crew was making their rounds in the gray October light, and she let herself feel the full weight of where she was going and why. She had not been this uncertain about something in a very long time. Uncertain was not a register she permitted herself often. She knew this about herself. The way certainty, or the performance of it, had become a kind of protection. If she knew what she was doing and why, nothing could blindside her the way her father's job loss had blindsided them both when she was 14. She had spent 16 years building a self that anticipated things, read rooms, understood the geometry of situations before walking into them. Soul was not a geometry she knew. J-Rim was not a geometry she knew entirely. Still. That was the thing she was flying 14 hours toward, the part of someone that only exists in the context of their own life, their own language, their own city. The part that doesn't translate into a professional relationship or a hotel lobby or a series of careful Friday evenings walking to coffee carts. She had known him now for 7 months, and she was only beginning to understand the shape of him, and there was something exposed about that, something that required the same quality of honesty she'd offered that Thursday in March, when she decided to stop being only the version of herself that had everything handled. She was good at her job. She would always be good at her job. That was not the question. The question was whether she could be good at this, at something unplanned, something she hadn't prepared for, something that asked her to not know what she was doing for a while and trust that the not knowing was survivable. Whether she could let a thing be uncertain without needing it to resolve immediately into something she could file and manage and cross-reference against a calendar. She thought she might be able to. She thought, tentatively, without pressing it too hard, that she might be someone who could do that. Not the 14-year-old who had started carrying everything, and not the 29-year-old who had organized her life around never being caught unready. Someone new, still in progress, still figuring it out. That was new. She was interested in it. She was nervous. She felt it clearly, sitting in the window seat with the city retreating below her, the grid of Manhattan going small and then gone. She didn't perform nervousness. That was still true of her. But she felt it, and she didn't try to manage it away, because she had started, slowly and with effort, to understand that feeling something and being undone by it were not the same thing. Her phone lit up. The flight is 14 hours. Sleep if you can. She looked at it. Then, I'll sleep when I get there. His response was immediate. Stubborn. She put her phone away. Outside the window, the Atlantic was already beginning below the clouds, gray and enormous, and utterly unconcerned with either of them. She thought about a Thursday in March when the rain wouldn't stop, about a lobby that smelled like cedar. about the 7 words of a text message that had put her in a chair across from a stranger who had no agenda, and how strange it was that being stood up had turned out to be the beginning of something she would not trade. She thought about her father's hand flat against the glass of the frame. She thought about 18 empty desks and 6 that were filled again, and the ones that weren't yet, and the work still to do. She thought about a man in a dark overcoat absorbing news he hadn't expected and choosing, in the next breath, to sit down and be present. The particular courage of that. The way some people, when hit by something, go still and then keep going. The way she recognized it because she did the same thing, and had not known until she met him that it was something worth recognizing. She was 30 years old. She was going to Seoul for the first time. She had a title on her badge she had earned, and a father who knew that something he built was in good hands, and a job she was not diminished by, and a man 14 hours away who had looked at her honestly from the first moment and had not stopped. There was a version of herself, the one she had been at 22, arriving at the firm with a folder of references and a carefully ironed blazer, and the specific determination of someone who has decided that competence is the answer to everything, who would not have recognized any of this. Who would have said, "You don't get on a plane for a person you've known 7 months. You don't let things be uncertain. You don't sleep in a lobby chair with a stranger and then spend the next year learning that the stranger is someone you want to know for the rest of your life. You build your life carefully, from the ground up, and you do not take risks you cannot calculate in advance." That version of herself had kept her safe for a very long time. She was grateful for her. She was also done letting her make every decision. Jay Rim had said, on one of those Friday evenings at the coffee cart, that the only real difference between a risk worth taking and one that wasn't was whether you could look at what you stood to lose and decide it was worth it. She had thought about that sentence more than she'd told him. She'd turned it over in quiet moments. On the subway, in the archive room, in the early morning before the building filled. And every time she turned it over, the answer that came back was the same. It was worth it. He was worth it. So was she. The plane lifted off. She slept the whole way there.